And we're good to go.
Fantastic. Okay, right. Thank you for coming, everybody. I'll start with apologies. I'm aware of an apology from Councillor Diggins and that Councillor Susanna Pressel is substituting for her. Is anybody aware of any other apologies? Ed Mundy.
Hi. So Mike Rowley's trying to join the meeting, so we're expecting him to come in, and I'm sure Jemima's also expecting to join the meeting, but I don't know where either of them are. Well, Mike is trying to join the meeting. So.
Sure thing.
Jemima's just joined.
Jemima has just appeared. Yeah. Okay, fantastic. I imagine there'll be a few cases of this due to the hasty reorganisation of the technical.
You have to click panelist. Anyway.
Am I okay to continue?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Declarations of interest. Would anybody like to venture a declaration of interest? I'm not seeing any hands, so I take it there are no declarations of interest. Chair's announcements. I have no announcements to make on this occasion. Minutes. Would anybody like to make any comment on the minutes from the previous meeting? Again, I don't see any hands, so I think there are no comments to be made. Right. The forward plan then. So this is simple as published in the agenda. However, apparently there is late breaking news that the Food Strategy Action Plan isn't in fact going to come to December Cabinet as expected, and a suggestion that the Authority Monitoring Report should move. I believe that was to be considered by our panel and should instead move to main scrutiny. That seems very sensible to me. Does anybody have any comment on that? Otherwise, I suggest that that should be promoted to main scrutiny. Anybody want to come in on that? Again, I don't see any comments, so in that case, let's do that. And the Primary Scrutiny Committee will consider the scheduled items as published in the agenda, minus the food strategy, because that won't be coming to Cabinet, but plus the Authority Monitoring Report. Fantastic. All right, in which case that brings us on to the main business. Now, there's been a request for the West End and Osney Mead SPD to be considered first for practical reasons affecting the people participating on that item, which I suggest would be the least worst option would be to revise the agenda in that way. So I think we should take that one first. So let's move on to that. And Councillor Hollingsworth, would you like to begin by introducing the item?
I'll introduce it briefly. First of all, apologies, as I think most of the members and many of the officers know, I had an operation last week, so I'm both unable to type and slightly less kempt than I would like to be in a public meeting, but I will do my best to keep up with things. The report you have in front of you essentially takes the West End and Osney Mead SPD, which went out for consultation, and sets out the results of that consultation and how our officers have considered the public comments received upon it and any amendments that are required as a result. I think I'd probably flag before passing over to the officers a couple of really key things. The SPD will, if adopted, form part of our suite of documents which make up the local plan, so it will become a formal document. But it will not and cannot conflict with the policies in the existing local plan document, and that's set out in paragraph 2 of the report, just to draw it to people's attention. So the SPD does not intend to rewrite the local plan, was never intended to rewrite the local plan, but what it does do is to add more detail to the local plan on a really key element of that local plan, which is the geographic area covered. So with that proviso in mind, I probably at this stage pass on to, I'm waiting to see if there's Sarah or Tom or Rome, who I think was here, is going to put their hand up. Who's volunteering to pick the ball up and run? Nobody. Okay, fine. Oh no, Tom is. Right. So at this point, I will pass on to Tom. So Tom will set out the sort of technical details of what we've got, and then I think it's your meeting, so over to you, and we'll try and field the questions as best we can.
You're muted, Tom.
There you go. Sorry, I was beginning before I unmuted. Just to build on what Alex has said, the purpose and status of the SPD is to provide further detail and advice on the implementation of existing adopted local plan policies. And there are three particular policies that are important in the West End. Firstly, the policy AOC1, which is the West End as an area of change. Secondly, SP1, which lists a number of different sites in the West End for mixed-use developments and includes the delivery of housing as well. And thirdly, SP2, which allocates Oseney Mead for a mixed-use development, including employment. I'll just highlight one or 2 points. Firstly, in terms of the vision, the SPD supports the spatial framework, which is a big evidence base behind the SPD, and that sets out a number of placemaking principles for new development, which seeks to achieve a number of things, particularly a vibrant community, a creative place, an area of enterprise and innovation, and an accessible and well-connected place. There are three golden threads that run through both the SPD and the spatial framework, and these are focused on a sustainability strategy, which includes climate change, a social value strategy, and an economic strategy. And these are all supported by a number of core strategies, which cover things like blue and green infrastructure, movement and connectivity, and public realm. Just to explain very briefly how to use the SPD, it summarizes and explains how to use and apply the principles of the spatial framework and design guide in helping to develop, design, and access new proposals. The SPD explains what is needed in different areas or types of location within the West End in order to meet the requirements of the individual strategies I've referred to. And it also focuses in particular on some key development sites like Oseney Mead, the Island site, Oxpens, and the station site. I'd like just to explain about the public consultation that's been undertaken. The Cabinet report does set out in detail the public consultation that has been done. It was over a period of time because the spatial framework was worked on in 2021 and has come forward to fruition now, and the result of the SPD as well. At the early stages of the spatial framework, there was some consultation undertaken in 2021, asking the public and stakeholders what they considered to be the key issues that any spatial framework should address. That was then taken forward by Levitt Bernstein, who undertook a visioning workshop, which built on those ideas and helped to inform the direction of the spatial framework. And more recently, we've obviously had the draft spatial framework, which has been out for public consultation for 7 weeks in total. The statement of public consultation, which is attached to all the documents, sets out in detail both the process and a summary of all the comments that have been received, both on the questionnaire and the individual letters we've had. I think it's important to point out that the nature of the public consultation has been guided to a large extent by the Town and Country Planning 2012 regulations, and also by the Statement of Community Involvement. but particularly at the early stages of the spatial framework, it's important to bear in mind, obviously, that the COVID-19 pandemic limited what we could do there in terms of public consultation. I'll just make a few more points, and then obviously we're open to questions. There was a questionnaire as part of the public consultation, which there were 92 respondents in total. I'll just run through one or two points that were raised, which I'm sure will come up in the discussion. Firstly, the vision. There was support for the development and regeneration of the West End and Oseley Mead area, but there was also concern expressed about climate change and sustainability and about the balance between housing and jobs. In relation to the green and blue infrastructure strategy, again, there was support from a number of people who particularly liked the idea of the greening of major routes, such as Oxbends Road. However, there was concern expressed about the impact on the waterways and the loss of some natural surfaces in those areas as a result of those being opened up, excuse me, rather more publicly. In terms of movement and accessibility, there was support for reducing car usage within the West End, but there was concern about the need for alternative traffic routes and the overall impact on Oxbends Road. There was a general comment about a requirement for more bus services and connections, which were considered necessary if housing and employment uses were to be increased. In terms of public realm, there was a concern there was a lack of inclusive principles in the public realm strategy to take into account the needs of disabled and less mobile people. And there was also concerns expressed about the green spaces and the waterways as potential key public spaces and the adverse impact that might have on biodiversity and ecological function and the impact on flood risk. Again, just very briefly, we had a number of individual comments, I think 31 in total, and those comments are summarised in the statement of public consultation. Just finally, how will the SPD be used? If adopted, the SPD will be a material consideration in determining planning applications, and schemes will need to show how they positively respond to the design principles set out in the core strategies and the supporting strategies. The key development sites in the West End will come forward, as we know, at different times and probably in different phases, but the SPD provides that spatial framework within which the infrastructure delivery, public realm, and access and movement issues can be considered holistically together. The advice and guidance in the SPD will sit alongside the relevant policies in the Oxford Local Plan. And just finally, there are two SPDs that exist at the moment on Oxbends and the station, and if adopted, those two SPDs are intended to be revoked. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm going to start somewhat unconventionally with one of my own questions, just because it's a very sort of broad, high-level question, and then I'll take questions from whoever wishes to venture one. So get your Zoom hands up, please, if you'd like to come in with a question. The top-level question, then, is about what in the SPD has, I'm going to say legal force, that might not be quite the right way to phrase it. For example, I note that within the local plan, there's a very clear delineation between what is sort of explanatory text and what is policy, and that when it comes to evaluating a planning application, that you should cite compliance or non-compliance with a policy, but not with a paragraph of explanatory text. It's of lower standing, if you like, relative to the hard and fast policies. Whereas in the SPD, there's especially in the spatial framework and the design guide, there's a great weight of text, but it doesn't seem like a great clarity as to where are the hard and fast lines about what you must comply with or must show you've considered, and what is expository text, what is informative, but of lesser standing. What is the intended distinction there, and what should a prospective applicant take away in terms of the things they need to be paying the most attention to?
Shall I start, and then maybe other colleagues might like to add things as well? I think the purpose of the individual strategies within the SPD and the spatial framework, those are the key principles. So in things like green and blue infrastructure, there are a number of bullet points in the SPD, and we'd expect any applicant submitting a planning application to have regard to those points and to show how within each of those strategies they do address the issues that have been raised there. In addition to that, you've also got the 3 golden threads that I mentioned earlier on in terms of sustainability and climate change, which is a key priority within the West End SPD, but also social value and the economic strategy as well. So you'll notice in the SPD, at the end of each of those strategies, we want the golden threads to be addressed as well. So it's a number of different points that need to be addressed in terms of the key principles of those strategies.
I think, yes,
Yes, please carry on.
probably worth saying that the local plan is where the statutory policies are. And obviously, they're the ultimate things that the applications need to comply with. The purpose of an SPD is to show in more detail how they are applicable in this area. So they don't. It's an SPD, so it can't contain statutory policies and it can't change the policies of the local plan. But where you have a policy in the local plan that says, for example, you need to have high quality design, what the SPD does is amplify that extensively and say good design in the West End means all of these things, and therefore it's giving more detail for a master planner, a developer, and someone making a decision about how to comply with policies specifically in the West End, and it gives general guidance for that area, if that's helpful at all.
But just to follow up briefly, I suppose what I'm getting at is, as I understand it, it is a material consideration in a way that a technical advice note isn't. And it would, for example, be reasonable to reject a planning application for reason that that there are things in the SPD which we believe you have not adequately addressed. Rather than necessarily needing to point to the local plan, like that failing to address the SPD would by itself be sufficient reason. And so it just surprises me a bit in the sense that in the context of the local plan, it would be really easy to point at the concrete places where, like, here is brief, terse, clear policy which you haven't addressed. Whereas here it would seem like it would be more something like you haven't addressed the intersection of golden thread 1 with strategy 5 as exposited across these sort of 30 pages or so, which it just feels like a more difficult thing to show that you have complied with or not complied with.
I think that's right, and I think what you've identified is the crux of the issue around planning. It is not an objective science, it's much more of a subjective art. And there is an inherent conflict between a requirement of a planning system which says you must give developers certainty, but at the same time you must allow for subjective decision making and for the possibility of a reasonable group of councillors acting as a planning committee to come to a different set of conclusions on the same set of facts. Those two things are inherent in the planning system and have been since 1947, and I think you are basically right in the heart of that in your question.
Okay, I will stop taking up the floor at this point and take some questions. In order, I have Councillor Belly-Summers, Councillor Pressel, and Councillor Pegg. If anybody else is wishing to queue up with a question, please raise a Zoom hand. Can I hand over to Councillor Belly-Summers, please?
Oh, hi. Sorry about that, but my camera doesn't work. Thank you, Chair. So, sorry, I've got lots of questions. Is the consultation period of 7 weeks enough for the resident to respond? That would be my first question. So I read the comments made by the public, the landowners and the stakeholders. Do the comments of the public carry the same weight as the landowners and the stakeholders? So the next question is about the residents commented that 400 homes were not enough. The inspector found that there was a right balance for future housing and employment development within the plan. How is that calculated? Is it a formula? How would that biodiversity would be retained and maintained? Because we talk about public realm versus biodiversity and the waterways. So the consideration to at least a bus-only route has been discussed with a bus. Has it been discussed with a bus company? And will it be some car sharing options? And the last one is about the comments made by Oxford University Development Plan as well as Oxford regarding the infrastructure. So there was no list of infrastructure requirements, and Oxford commented that. It's a kind of difficult kind of formula because it's shared delivery infrastructure. So I wanted some more kind of details about that. Thank you very much. Sorry about the amount of question. Sorry. Thank you.
Chair, shall I start? And that will give Tom and Sarah a chance to put their thoughts in order on that last question in particular, because I don't know the answer to that one off the top of my head without looking. So I'm buying them a little bit of time to answer the infrastructure question. On the consultation issue, the statutory consultation period is 6 weeks. Obviously, we extended that to give people enough time. We got a very substantial number of comments, so I would suggest that yes, it is not just an adequate time, but a more than adequate time for consultation responses. It does seem to be a thing at the moment, and we're aware of that because I've seen the campaign emails to say that whatever consultation time is offered for any consultation, it's insufficient, and that's kind of part of the playbook, as it were. I think in this instance we deliberately extended it, and I think it's very much a sufficient consultation period. In terms of weight, all the consultation responses have the same weight, whatever the response is, whether it's from an individual or from a landowner. It's got to be treated in exactly the same way. The important thing is that consultations on a formal planning document like this, it's not a referendum. It has to be judged against the tests of soundness, for example, that are set out in the NPPF. Is it a valid response? So if we were talking about here a local plan policy, for example, you could have 10,000 people saying your local plan policy is right. But if one person produces evidence that your local plan policy is not right, and that evidence is compelling, then that one person is going to outweigh the 10,000. So the issue is the weight of evidence that the person produced to support their argument. The housing numbers, the housing numbers are set in the local plan. That's what the response says there. The overall number for the city is set out in the local plan. That's derived from the need for affordable housing. The numbers for these sites was based on the capacity of the sites and the potential for delivering them, and that was tested extensively at the local plan hearings. The inspector upheld those numbers, and to go back to my sort of starting point, this SPD cannot change those policies. The bus-only route, this, if I recollect, and I apologise if I'm getting off piste here because I haven't got the particular page in front of me. The bus-only route was a suggestion that essentially provide a new road into the system for buses only. One that's probably going beyond what's in the SPD, which in the local plan, apologies, which does not identify any need for a bus-only route, and the county council, who are the highways authority, have not identified any requirement for such a route. What the local plan and the SPD does is to identify these as opportunities to significantly reduce, preferably to zero, the amounts of parking on some sites which are extremely heavily parked at the moment, particularly on Oseley Mead. There are clearly opportunities for buses to run onto Oseley Mead in particular, and I think it is quite likely that we will end up with buses entering Oseney Mead and laying over there, because it's a really good layover spot for buses, much easier than having them lay over at the station where there's limited space. And those are conversations which have been had, continue to be had, and will continue to be had with the bus companies going forward. I think there was a question about biodiversity, but I can't remember what it was, so I'm hoping the officers wrote that down. I've just written biodiversity, and I apologise, I can't remember what the element of question was, and I hope that now someone knows the answer to the infrastructure question.
I was asking a question, sorry, about car sharing in the development, in the option of car sharing in the development before the diversity question, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Well, car sharing, again, there wouldn't be a planning policy requirement beyond that which is in the local plan. Clearly, if we had a development, say on Oseney Mead, which referred to the local plan policies and the SPD policies, it would be a requirement that they had some kind of travel minimisation plan, and car sharing could, if appropriate, fall an element of that. I would hope to see them go a lot further, but it would clearly be something they can and should be picking up as part of their active travel plan.
With the biodiversity question, that was how would biodiversity be maintained? Is that right? That's what I wrote down. I think, again, this is how this document needs to act with the local plan, but obviously all of the local plan policies that require not only maintenance of biodiversity, but also enhancements are still applicable. So any proposals would need to demonstrate that. In terms of the infrastructure, I think that Oxwed's question was about delivery mechanisms, which I think as an oversight, we hadn't been clear about SIL particularly, and that would still be applying, and that is a key delivery mechanism that enables a sharing of the burden, really, and a sharing of the delivery of infrastructure across the area. So we have amended that in the document, which I think overcomes Oxwed's concerns.
I think also, just to add to that, Sarah, certainly in the spatial framework itself, there's quite a list of indicative infrastructure projects. It is only indicative, partly because detailed design schemes haven't been drawn up, but it does give a realistic impression of the costing of some of those schemes. But in addition to that, there is the infrastructure delivery plan, which is being prepared at the moment to help support the new local plan. And that will be updated on a regular basis. It will be like a live document. So that will provide some more certainty about the costing and possible sources of resource allocation for those projects.
Thank you for all those responses. I think in the interest of time, it may well be that there's one or two things unaddressed, but if there are, I'd ask you to take them offline, please, so we can get more people's questions in. Can I come to Councillor Pressel, please?
Thanks, Chris. Right, I've got quite a lot of questions and comments, as you can imagine, but do stop me if I'm going on too much. There are lots of good things about the SPD and the design guide and so on. I like the golden threads and the emphasis on biodiversity and the climate crisis and so on. And I like the blue-green network, the blue network, for instance, except I don't have much faith, I'm sorry to say, in the Environment Agency, because they're so understaffed and overworked, to work with us to sort out the streams, which currently in some places are in an absolutely dreadful state. So I'll be interested to know how people intend to work with the Environment Agency to realise all the lofty aims of the blue network. I like the idea of undergrounding electric cables. That would be absolutely wonderful. Now Tom gave a very good summary of the comments in the public consultation, but I would like to amplify some of those because I've been lobbied so extensively by the people I represent in that area, as the ward councillor, of course. As we've heard, there's a huge concern about overdevelopment, and that has been exacerbated by some very unfortunate artist impressions in some of the documentation, which show a really awful concrete riverbank in places like the edge of Oseney Mead and in other places as well. It looks absolutely dreadful, whereas now it looks beautiful and green. So people are horrified at the thought that it's going to be urbanised in the way that's shown in those artists' impressions. So if you do any more consultation, like for the planning applications and so on, please make sure we don't get pictures like that. And there is a big concern about Oxpens Road, and it's not clear how the sill is going to be spent, because the county council, who I've been talking to about this, say that most of Oxpens Road, like Hollybush Row and the other end perhaps, are not wide enough to put in proper cycle lanes, and certainly not beautiful trees like a kind of boulevard, which I had hoped to see. They seem to think that they shouldn't do anything, even in the stretch of Oxpens Road beside the current development that we're talking about. So we're going to have a battle there, I'm afraid. And also another bit of the sill we were hoping would be spent on that path that leads from the back of the ice rink to Gibbs Crescent and Mill Street. I hope you all know that very strange path where you have to duck under the railway bridge and it's all muddy and horrible. Now, it's a very heavily used path. A lot goes along the river, and it's really important for connectivity, and it's in private ownership, a lot of it. So it's not clear if that's one of the things that you were talking about compulsorily purchasing. I hope it is, and I hope something will be done to make it much, much better, but that would be a good use of the sill. We also need indoor community spaces and things like lots of cycle parking and toilets, public toilets and so on. And those things haven't been discussed or written down anywhere. So you can't just have a beautiful amphitheatre and say, yes, we've done everything for the public realm. You've got to think more widely, so please do. I'm very concerned about how we're going to consult the residents of St Thomas's and St Ebbs. They're difficult to consult, and I know we mustn't put it like that really, because it's our fault if we're not consulting them properly, but I think it's partly because most of them lived in rented properties, so they're not so interested in engaging with something, since they may be here today, gone tomorrow by the time this is built. So I think we need to think carefully about how we can engage some of the people in Christchurch old buildings, Faulkner Street, and some of those other places. Those two are social housing. So we do need to know what they think and how they're planning to use this new development. And then the people who are mostly lobbying me are the people who, in figure 1 on page 4 of the SPD, which is a beautiful kind of map, it says that these are the people who have the potential to be affected. And this is Osney Island and Mill Street. And they are horrified, absolutely horrified by this development, because at the moment they're in a little kind of villagey state. It's as if they lived in the countryside almost, and they haven't realised that they live very close to the city centre, and they're going to have huge amounts of development, which, as they say, will not benefit them. Their area is going to be a huge building site for years to come, and they're really unhappy. So we're going to have to work out how we can calm them down, please. And then I'm a bit sad that we seem to have got nowhere with Green Square Court, who own the Richard Gray Court building, because that was supposed to be brought into the site, and we seem to have got nowhere with discussing that. And then in paragraph 36 of the SPD, there's a wonderful bit about community food growing and new play spaces, but I see no mention of any of that in the Oxford development plan. So where is that, please? And they also talk about opening up the remnants of Osney Abbey and Osney Mill Cottage. Now, those are in private ownership, and I rather doubt that we're going to be able to CPO them, because they've been in the same family for generations. So I'd be interested to know if we've got anywhere with that. And then we want to bring the riverbank into the heart of the Osney Conservation Area and open up Bridge Street to the river. That would be anathema to the people who live in Bridge Street and South Street and East Street. So I don't know quite what you mean there. And how far have we got with opening up the Environment Agency depot? Because I'd be surprised if that were actually to happen. Just 3 more points quickly. Hang
on, sorry. Okay. I'm afraid I am going to have to take up your invitation. Because of the limitations of time that are in front of us.
Sorry, these are 3 really important, really quick points. Please.
It's not only the points, it's also the fact that we need to hear reply to all of them as well.
Yes.
So what I'd like to ask to happen is, if you could please specify let's say the 3 things that you would most like to hear a live reply about now.
Okay.
And then with people's consent, if we could get the full list of your your questions sent to the Scrutiny Committee, and if officers and Councillor Hollingsworth could similarly reply publicly to the Scrutiny Committee after the meeting, or within reasonable time frame. Is that acceptable to people?
Yes, that's fine by me. One point which I haven't actually mentioned yet is they talk about a 15-minute place as being a major wish for this development. Are we going to try and make sure there's a grocer's there and a post office and so on? How is that to be realised? Another thing I would like to have addressed now is the public consultation question that I raised. And another one is the Blue Network. Have we had discussions with the Environment Agency about that?
Okay, I'll start because I think I've tried to write down as many of those as possible. I would say 2/3 of them can be answered by saying those are issues for any planning applications, rather than the SPD itself. I mean, picking things up, the details of the the Oxwed site planning application, which is in the process of being submitted now. There's a whole load of things which relate to that, so not to the strategic planning document. It will be picked up in the planning application. So cycle parking, toilets if there is need for such a thing. The Green Square site is clearly within the SPD. It's not excluded, it's entirely included. The sill issues, I think, would be dealt with through that. The compulsory purchase of a path kind of outside the remit of a planning document, so that would have to be something that will be dealt with by an appropriate other mechanism if necessary. On the issue which you started off with on the Oxpens Road and the County Council and Sill, I am aware that the applicant for Oxpens would be delighted if the County Council could make up its mind about what it thought ought to be done with the Oxpens Road through Sill funding. And that's a conversation that's ongoing, and anything you can do to bring it to an answer, just one answer, whatever the answer is, would make life much easier for everybody. There were some points about the visualizations, which I'm going to let officers pick up with. Danger of visualizations often is that they can slightly differ from the text. So whether there is anything where the Oseley Mead visualizations or the one around Bridge Street or the opposite of Bridge Street visualizations are different. I think what I would say is looking at and I do appreciate, I've spoken to people in Mill Street and I've spoken to people on Oseley Island. I appreciate their concerns, but the developments are not accessed through, via or in either Mill Street or Oseley Mead or Oseley Island. Oseley Mead is accessed obviously down the Ferry Hinksey Road. It's separate. Oxpens is accessed from the Oxpens Road. So these developments will be in proximity and they will change things. That's absolutely true, but they won't be a development site per se because the geography is slightly different to the way it's been described. But I would say at least 2/3, if not 3/4 of those issues are ones of planning application detail.
Okay, right. So again, in interest of time and knowing that we only have Councillor Turner for so long, what I'll do is I will take Councillor Pegg's question. I'll reiterate that if Councillor Pressel would please email around her list of questions, copying the committee, that would be extremely welcome. And similarly, whatever responses either Councillor Hollingsworth or the officers would like to venture would again allow us to get into just a little bit more depth on the many things raised. I'll come to Councillor Pegg and then I'll explain more later. Councillor Pegg, please. You seem to be unmuted, but I can't hear you, sorry. Is anybody else able to hear Councillor Pegg? Is that just me having this problem?
We're audience, aren't we?
You also can't hear.
I can't hear either.
Like a dead mic.
Yeah, so you now are on mute, but whilst you weren't on mute, I couldn't hear you, I'm afraid. Do you want to have one more go? And if not, then I'll have to ask you to use the same mechanism as Councillor Pressel. Councillor Hollingsworth, are you happy to volunteer offline responses in that case?
Yes, within reason. I've only got one operating limb, which makes typing quite not just quite difficult, actually actively painful and difficult to achieve. So I am not keen to answer 20 questions at length in writing, if at all possible, Chair.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, understood. Perhaps officers could weigh in though.
I think we just heard Councillor Pegg, if you want to try again.
Yeah,
yes, please, go ahead. Yes, yes, I can. Please go ahead.
Apparently Zoom on my computer needs updating, and so I'm on some weird browser version. But what I wanted to ask was about the relationship between the this document and the local plan that's in development, because if this is a long-term planning vision for that area, then surely some of the developments that come forward might happen when that new local plan is in place and whatever its policies are apply. In which case this kind of big skew towards employment and kind of leisure purposes rather than housing, which is definitely one of the big things that came up in the consultation as something that people weren't quite happy with. Will that still work if we potentially have a local plan in which perhaps it will say that there's we need to be building far more houses in Oxford, especially with the Oxfordshire 2050 not having worked out. If that was the case, how would this plan then work in relationship with that plan that doesn't quite exist? I didn't quite understand that, and think perhaps I guess this could be a recommendation, is that it would be good to be clearer in the SPD, like how it will work with the local plan that might come in next.
I think with the new local plan, we will make reference to this SPD to make sure that it can still be used. So we've done that before, and that's fine. So the SPD would remain a material consideration. Whether things change in terms of the local plan strategy and then whether they affect the SPD, we don't yet know, obviously, but I would say that there aren't significantly different circumstances that would suggest a justification for a complete change in direction that would make the SPD irrelevant, especially as most of the things which were coming up were not issues to do with the SPD, but things to do with existing policies, which even if we change those, they don't actually affect how we've written the SPD. So the design guidance, for example, I mean, there's basics which aren't going to change, like it is a mixed use area. It will still be important for employment. Even if the balance changes slightly, that will be reflected in maybe the minimum numbers in the local plan, but that won't affect what is said about the green and blue network, that it's a mixed use area, that it has a mix of houses and employment. So the fundamentals of the document will remain relevant, even if there are slight changes to the policy approach.
Thank you. Okay, so what I propose to do now is we still need to figure out what, if any, formal recommendations we want to make. But it occurs to me that that's a thing which the committee can do between ourselves. So it would enable us to let the officers and Councillor Hollingsworth go and make the most of Councillor Turner's time if we were now to proceed to the discussion of the procurement strategy, and then come back to talk recommendations at a later point. So thank you very much, Councillor Hollingsworth. Thank you very much to all three officers joining on the item for your input, and the recommendations you'll have to find out about in the papers published. But I hope they won't be too surprising. Let's now proceed to the procurement strategy. Councillor Turner, would you like to introduce the item, please?
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I'm joined by Annette Osborne, our excellent procurement officer, who has worked tirelessly on this one, and will no doubt be able to offer some more informed comments. I mean, just a few headline things really from me. It's sort of unscripted, because I think that's sometimes the best way. We have a procurement strategy to guide our processes as a council, and clearly a lot of procurement we do. The figures are in here, but 150 million pounds, something like that. And I think with our procurement work, we have a number of really important ambitions. We want to add value to our local economy. This is a classic case, really, where, if you like, we can support a circular economy where spend happens locally. We want to reduce our carbon footprint as a council, and clearly, when you're spending that amount of money, it's important. We want to support local skills. That's an important area. We want to ensure that workers at companies that we procure from are decently paid. And I think there's actually a link to our wider effort in the inclusive economy here as well, because of course we can lead by example. We're an important procurer, we're an important employer in Oxford, but actually we're an important commissioner. But we also have a leadership role locally. And of course, if we weren't doing our procurement right in those terms, then we wouldn't be taken seriously. So that's the one side of things. Secondly, of course, we also need to secure good value in what we procure, and it's possible sometimes, I think, with some of the sort of loftier objectives, to almost lose sight of just the nuts and bolts of this as well, which are really important. We need things that we procure, whether they're goods or services, to be provided in a timely way, reliably, and in a cost-effective manner. And that's the kind of bread and butter of procurement, if you like. And in all of those things, we clearly ought to be tracking what we do, reporting information in as precise a way as possible. This strategy, in a number of ways, which is covered in the covering report, evolves our work. I don't think there are any massive breaks with previous tradition, but I think we've added quite a lot of granularity, particularly in terms of the social value and climate objectives, and we're clear about what we're doing and how we monitor it. So that should be good. Also on equality, diversity, and inclusion objectives as well. That's where we are. I think one other area which I'd want to flag at this juncture is we've tried as best we can to keep the strategy high level, and Annette, in response to some early feedback, has worked hard on this. So we're trying to set out principles rather than necessarily put in all the details of all of our processes here in the strategy, so that it's a strategy rather than, if you like, a template, an action plan, anything like that. Welcome comments. We're trying to be the best we can be on this. Do bear in mind, the nuts and bolts objectives, as well as the kind of value-driven ones. Happy to take any questions. It looks like I might get an extra 5 or 10 minutes. Things domestically are a little bit calmer than I expected, so probably about a quarter of an hour or so. And I do apologise about that. It's just it comes with the territory sometimes. Sorry.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, let's get straight on to questions in the interest of making the most of your available time. I'll have Councillor Jarvis, then Councillor Mundy, then Councillor Pressel.
And thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ed, for that introduction. I've got quite a few comments, but I'll try and rattle through them as quickly as possible in the interest of time. So I've got some general kind of comments and questions, and then some very specific ones. So in terms of the general, the first thing I just wanted to flag was, it's brilliant that there's such an emphasis on social value and sustainable procurement within the strategy. I think one aspect of that for me is missing overall is an emphasis on the kind of international impact of supply chains and utilising procurement to ensure that the supply chains don't have human rights violations, and using it for positive purposes, and that I think it would be useful to have an express line in there. I have a few kind of follow-up questions or comments in relation to that point. So one of the things that the procurement bill is mentioned throughout the document, and my understanding of the procurement bill was that one of the major changes from the EU legislation that we that we previously had was the removal of the subject matter clause in relation to issues of ethical and sustainable procurement, and it would be good to get comments on what the kind of impact we think that's going to have on the kind of procurement strategy and the ability for us to do more extensive work around those things. Some slightly more specific comments on the kind of international element of this. I think there are lots of councils which have started to adopt ethical procurement code of conducts for their suppliers, and lots of them are using the Ethical Trading Initiative base code, and that's not something that's mentioned in the strategy. It may well be something that is looked at elsewhere, but it'd be good to get a sense of whether there's a view towards to adopting a code of conduct for the purposes of tendering, but also for contractor for contract management and performance. So the ETI code is based on the ILO standards, and it's a model, but it's not the only one. In terms of the specific areas that I had questions on, I mean, so the first one is in relation to the social value aspect of this, and there's lots of great stuff in there in terms of working with local suppliers, SMEs, living wage, cooperatives, and so on. One thing that I don't think is listed in there is around working with suppliers within the procurement strategy around union recognition, and ensuring that and working to ensure that the any companies that are contracted have a union recognition agreement, which to me is quite crucial in terms of delivering that social value in a sustainable way. The other specifics that I had was there's obviously quite a lot around sustainable ethical procurement and social value in relation to the tendering process, but not in relation to the contract performance and management process within the strategy. And it'd be good to get some comment as to why it's focusing on the tendering section rather than the other aspects of the procurement process as well. And then finally on the specifics, so in relation to the kind of ethical procurement section, which is on page 37, it talks specifically about supply chain monitoring, but it doesn't refer to what that looks like and how that is done. And best practice when it comes to supply chain monitoring in ethical procurement is working with independent labour monitoring organisations rather than the social auditing model. And I wanted to get a sense of what approach is being taken there. And then, sorry, my final question, I promise, is on page 38, there's a reference to the Modern Slavery Act and reviewing contracting companies' modern slavery statements. The phrasing in there just says that the modern slavery statements are checked. And it's not clear what's done with that, because obviously there's a vast difference in quality of the modern slavery statements that are produced by companies, some of which just do the bare minimum, some of which follow the full Home Office guidance on due diligence. So it'd be good to get a sense of that as well. I'm sorry, that was a huge array of different questions, but this is my my jam. So hopefully we can have a number of recommendations or responses.
Cheers. Should we do that one now, Chris?
Yeah, go for it.
As best we can. Yeah, there's quite a lot there. I think so. A couple of bits. I mean, one is, and it probably relates a bit to the flavour of my introductory comments. We'll do what we can, Chris, and I'm happy to sort of take it away. And I think it's a fair comment about the international dimension. And I think some of it is picked up pretty clearly by implication in terms of the way that we talk about that. We can look at it, making it a bit more explicit. I think, and certainly the point about contract management and making sure that we do perform is something which absolutely runs through this, actually. And so, Annette may have other comments on that, but I think that's one of the objectives of this strategy. There's absolutely no point in paying attention to all the things you want to deliver through the procurement process if they then don't actually get delivered. In terms of the sort of specifics of what we can try and fit in there, Annette, you may have some comments, may have some thoughts. Otherwise, we'll sort of take it away. If you make a recommendation, we'll try and do it as best we can.
I think yeah, just before we move on, probably just a couple of comments. I mean, I'd like, Chris, if you could just sort of perhaps drop a note with some of those things to me, because I was scribbling, but I probably missed some of them. But I think the key to remember is that this strategy started off as a document with a lot of information in, and we've gradually, through various people having different ways that they like to see it written and everything else. We've stripped a lot back out of it. So there probably was a lot in around what you're talking about, but we've tried to create an external facing document because the strategy should be for our external stakeholders rather than how we actually do things internally and how much in detail we go to internally. So it's getting that balance right.
Okay, thanks very much both. Yeah, to reiterate, if I could invoke what I'm going to christen the Pressel Protocol, if Chris J wouldn't mind circulating those remarks to the committee also. I know there was a lot more there than I could sort of take in real time. And Ed and Annette, if you're able to respond in public, if you like, that would be very much appreciated. Obviously, I can't oblige you to do so, but if you're willing to do so, that would be very welcome. I'll take Councillor Pressel's question, please.
Right, thank you. I thought Edward was going next.
He was, but he lowered his hand, which I took to mean that he maybe thought his question had already been asked. Edward, is that the case?
I have just one.
No, it's not the case. I'm happy for Susanna to go first, though. It's just my Zoom's been flaking up.
I've only got one question. It's very short. You'll be glad to hear this time. I was interested that Ed, in his introduction, mentioned that Oxford City Council has a leadership role, quite rightly. And I just wondered to what extent we can influence our partners to adopt similar principles for their own procurement strategies. That's it.
Yeah, what a good question, Susanna, and absolutely. So this falls under Matt Peachley's team, and and a wider inclusive economy work. They've been pursuing, for example, inclusive economy seminars with particularly key employers in Oxford, and doing some really fantastic things to try and encourage them to embrace, for example, living wage policies. Really, really important. Good progress has been made with that, but also there are areas where, to be honest, I think we would want to see more. It's not right that some of the fantastically wealthy institutions in Oxford, like the colleges, still don't pay an Oxford living wage. That's not as it should be, and so we'll keep going at it. But they're absolutely on it. And I mean, I don't know if it's the sort of thing committee's interested in, but I suspect Matt and I don't lead on it in the cabinet. It fall I think more with Susan Brown and Imogen Thomas, but I think they would welcome the opportunity to talk about this area of work. It's definitely something we take really seriously. But and our procurement strategy is part of it, and it has to be right. But there's more that we can do in exercising leadership. So absolutely.
Thank you, Councillor Mundy, please.
Hello. Yeah, thank you for that. My connection on this call tweaked out a bit while Chris Jarvis was speaking, and he did mention something about unions. I didn't catch the rest of what he said, so obviously I welcome what he said about good practice in terms of trade unions. I just wanted to sort of mention specifically about the treatment of employers and good employment practice, and draw attention of the committee to the motion that council passed earlier this year in relation to fire and rehire, where council resolved to seek to commit for employers to not use fire and rehire as part of their social clause. And I was just wondering if the committee would agree that that could be specified in this particular document, and in terms of also in terms of a better employment practice is generally, and with regard to, obviously, as been pointed out in the report, about pay and paying the Oxford living wage.
Cool, thanks. With you in spirit, Edward, but that probably doesn't completely help, because being with you in spirit isn't quite enough. You want it in the policy, which is fair enough. I think Annette may have some comments on this. I mean, certainly we can include. I'm sure we can include some appropriate words. The one bit which
having not thought about it and not being a procurement professional, that may have some comments we probably want to watch out for a bit on the union recognition is you might have a workplace, it might be particularly quite a small one. Of course, we're also committed to using local small suppliers. If the question has not been raised, we certainly wouldn't want to be knocking them out. Yeah, I mean, that'd be unwise. I think what you're getting at is about good employment practices. I think, you know, maybe asking the question in some way about union recognition, at least that could be a good way to go. And again, if fire and rehire wouldn't necessarily be able always to pick up on it, but I think we ought to ask the question as best as we can. Annette, what are your thoughts on that one? We'll probably get a recommendation on it. It would be a good recommendation to make. I'd welcome it, and we'll see what we can do. But Annette, your witness, please.
It sits in terms of conditions for the large contracts at the moment. So we do pick it up. It's just it's not in the strategy. It is something that's being done already.
Mm-hmm. Well, there you go. That's good. I think it's important and interesting to members. We will put it in. What Annette said just now, she'll probably be tearing her hair out after this call, is absolutely right. We have been bearing down on the length and level of detail in this strategy brutally to make it more headline. And so, you know, probably saved in the depths of Annette's laptop is you know, a fair bit of text which has been asked about. Some of it will just be reinstated, but you know, you're trying to find a balance between a document which is enormous, which then no one reads and doesn't kind of have the headline role, and something which is too thin. But yeah, hopefully that helps a bit, and we'll try and give that the visibility that it needs.
Thank you. Okay, I just have a couple of questions to pose, and then let's talk recommendations. Question one is, we give a list of socially desirable outcomes that we've sort of achieved from our suppliers. Does that list include first parties, i.e. does that include cases where the council bought something from ODS, for example? And if it does, would it be useful to split that out between council-owned companies and independent companies?
Do you want me to answer that one? It's not ODS, doesn't include ODS.
Okay, great. In that case, that list is indicating what we're getting from third-party suppliers, which is yes. Which is the optimal outcome. Excellent. Okay, and the second question is, do we or should we measure the satisfaction either of internal users of the procurement process or of suppliers who are selling to the council?
Is that a question for everybody else or for me?
It's a question for either you or Councillor Turner, I suppose.
I mean, okay, no, it's fair challenge. I'm not sure I mean, I expect that gets probably quite a bit of feedback from officers on how procurement processes are going. And that you may have some thoughts on how that's monitored. And obviously, we got the performance, you know, the different bits of performance information. So, you know, that may help as well. On the suppliers, I mean, we've got quite focused actually on kind of meet the supplier events, and I guess we could, you know, we'd get feedback at those anyway. I mean, we good practice if you organise events, get some feedback. But any other thoughts? Sounds like a fair suggestion to me.
I think it's quite difficult to manage it holistically across the organisation because we're a devolved procurement, so we don't pick up on everything that we do. So we do seek feedback on projects that we run for stakeholders, on the training that we give stakeholders. So we do a whole feedback into the team for all of that we do. But other than that, no, we don't.
Okay, thank you. I'll probably seek to sort of put this into some sort of recommendation. I'll be interested to see the response. Just to roughly explain my reasoning is just that because there's a lot that we ask of people in the course of this process, it just occurs to me there's a danger that the process becomes, you know, Byzantine, or is seen as difficult, or that the council is, you know, difficult to interact with because of a multitude of requirements. It would be interesting to hear whether any suppliers feel dissuaded from dealing with the council, or whether internal buyers feel that they're getting worse results than they could due to any of this. I'm not saying it's necessarily the case, just that it would be good to know if it is the case. Anyway, okay, I don't see any other hands raised, which suggests that we should put together some formal recommendations. So first of all, Councillor Mundy, you gave a fairly direct phrasing of a recommendation. How would you want to put your recommendation around fire and rehire and unions?
Chair, sorry, can
Yes.
I be very cheeky? If I may, I wouldn't want to cramp the committee's style in formulating recommendations, but also I'd like my kids to get dinner. So if it's all right, I'll bow out now and look forward to the recommendations and responding to them, if that's okay.
Yes, sorry, please. Thank you very much to Councillor Turner and to Annette for attending. Annette, please do go if you want to, or stay to hear and respond to recommendations if you want to.
I'll go if that's all right.
All right, thank you very much then. Councillor Mundy, how would you like your recommendation to be shaped?
Right. Okay. So it doesn't. I appreciate what Ed said actually about the length of the document. And obviously, you know, it not being too weighty. So it would really be quite brief, around roughly around in the document. I haven't got it open right now, but where it's talking about the Oxford Living Wage, I think it would fit in sort of quite well in that kind of area where we could just say, well, we're also going to be seeking to promote good quality employment practices. And in line with what Council passed in March this year, to ensure that employers are not using fire and rehire as a means to intimidate the workforce, or something similar to that sort of effect. It doesn't have to have the word intimidate in it, but something like that.
Okay, I think I understood that reasonably well. Richard, do you think you have enough clarity there to turn that into text?
Yeah.
I see nodding and fumbling from mute buttons. That seems positive. Excellent. Thank you. Councillor Jarvis, I've no doubt you've a few formal recommendations to take out of the list. Please go for it.
Yeah, I think two, which I think should be relatively straightforward and intuitive. One, which again it relates to the one that Ez just put forward, which is just to include promoting trade union recognition within the social value element. So seeking to work with companies that not only pay the living wage or cooperatives, etc., but also recognise trade unions. And then the second one that I think is quite top level is the kind of core point that I made at the start around the fact that there's very little in the way of reference to the international dimension of the council supply chains, specifically in relation to human rights and labour rights abuses, and seeking to promote good work practices. Hopefully those are relatively non-controversial with the committee. I have kind of more specific ones. I would suspect if Ed was here, he would say that they are too specific for the strategy. But I think for me, if I were to phrase them in a kind of vague enough way, the two that I think would be quite important from my perspective in terms of making this strategy actually a reality in terms of the kind of labour rights element of things and the ethical procurement strand. One would be to explore working with independent labour monitoring organisations in monitoring of ethical procurement in its supply chains, and then the second being to consider whether to adopt a ethical code of conduct for the purposes of contracts such as the ETI base code, which may be too specific, but those are the four that I think I have. Maybe the first two less controversial, the second two maybe more.
Okay, great. So on the point of clarity, I think I definitely understand what you're getting at on promoting trade union recognition using the ETO? Sorry, that shows how much more familiar you are with this.
The ETI base code, the Ethical Trading Initiative, yeah,
base code as a yardstick. And working with labour monitoring organisations will make sense to me. Could you give just a little bit more detail on the recommendation number 2, the one about all I've written down is international labour, because I couldn't quite see how it's going to turn into a recommendation.
Sorry, yeah. So the specific, so I guess the strategy document that was before us had quite an extensive amount of detail about what's, the council's doing locally and intends to do locally with its procurement in terms of its supply chains on living wage locally, SMEs and so on. What it doesn't refer to is what it's seeking to do to protect human rights and labour rights in the international element of its supply chains, i.e. if they buy a computer, that computer is comprised of parts which have been made in factories all across the globe, and how is that being monitored and so on. That could be done with being explicit, I think, in there. Does that make sense?
Yes, very much so. Thank you. Okay, so my scrawled notes is I've got setting out our goals when they come to effects outside of our local area, especially internationally. Working with labour monitoring organisations as a way to determine whether we are procuring ethically and considering adopting the ETI-based code or something of that nature as a specific yardstick. I think that all makes sense to me. Richard, how are you doing on notes on these things? Would you be happy to circulate drafts of these by Councillor Jarvis as well as a way to verify that you've arrived at a meeting of minds here? So what about everybody else in the room? Are people happy with, you described them as potentially controversial recommendations. I personally, I don't see them as such. Does anybody wish to quarrel with any of the 5 recommendations that we've got in front of us?
Yes, I wondered if we could perhaps add in a bit about how we would like Cabinet to consider how they're going to use this document to try to influence our partners so that we fulfill our leadership role, which Ed mentioned, because it would be good if the colleges, for instance, would pay heed to the Oxford Living Wage and so on. So I feel quite strongly that we need to use this to try and influence others.
So obviously there's the existing stuff about weighing social value in evaluating potential supply.
This would be an extra recommendation.
Mm-hmm. I just wondered if you could be a bit more specific as to what additional thing you'd want to see done outside of what they're already doing.
Okay, so Cabinet should do its best to make sure that the Council goes further than this, which is just an internal document, by discussing it with all our partners in the various forums that they have, and influencing others to have a similarly enlightened procurement strategy. But that's not a very tactful way to put it. But they'll know what we mean if we say that we want others to adopt things like the Oxford Living Wage. And this would be a way of perhaps doing it. I'm not quite sure how they'll do it though. But yeah, just okay. So sharing the document with others, perhaps.
So something along the lines of sort of reaffirming our sort of evangelism of the Oxford Living Wage. Perhaps evangelism might not be the best word to use, but
no. Mish might have a good idea about how to put this.
Mish, you've been dropped in it. Would you like to?
Sorry, no, I've been very much. I'm waiting for my other item and getting on with work, as you'd expect a council officer to do. So I'm sorry, I really just haven't been paying deep attention to this item, which is not one which is in my area of responsibility. But if you have a question, I will happily take it. Sorry, I just don't know what was asked of me.
Shall I say? When we were discussing this item, I asked Ed Turner if he thinks, he mentioned that the City Council has a leadership role, so it's important that we're clear on how we do our procurement. And I said, could we, bearing in mind our leadership role, could we discuss with our partners in things like the Oxford Community, what's it called, the Oxford Partnership or something, board?
Oxford Strategic Partnership, yes.
Yes, that's the one. We should try and put our new procurement strategy on the agenda of that board and say...
Yes, we can certainly do that. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
We could certainly do that, and indeed, of course, within the relatively recently published new Oxford Economic Strategy document, I mean, there is a section around, more procurement methods along the lines that which the council is adopting here, being being recommended elsewhere in the city. So I think that that is absolutely aligned indeed to the council's wider inclusive economy strategy. Yeah, so certainly it's something which we can communicate.
Okay, good. And could that be a fourth recommendation, do you think? Perhaps you haven't been looking at the recommendations, but I think it would be an extra one.
But no, obviously, yeah, it's something which we can certainly deliver. So
great, thank you.
Not a problem.
It sounds to me like an uncontroversial recommendation that I think everybody is on board with. So if that's all right. Okay, would anybody else like to make any further comment on these, or should we draw a line under the prototypical recommendations there? I don't see any hands. I don't hear anyone chiming in. So in that case, let's draw a line there. Thank you all for that. And let's move on to our third and final item for today, which is the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. We have Councillor Smith, we have Neris Parry, and we have Mishtala, who has made an unexpectedly early entry into the but it's always good to keep our officers on their toes, I think. Councillor Smith, would you like to introduce the item?
Yeah, just to say, I mean, this is an opportunity for government funding, which is really important that we take. We've got big ambitions to improve the energy efficiency and reduce the carbon output from our council homes. We want to get 95% of our council homes up to EPC C or above by 2030. We've got some money in the medium-term financial plan and in our business plan for the next 10 years to contribute towards that work. But the survey work we've had done suggests that it's not going to be enough. So these opportunities for external funding, in particular for money from government, it's really important that we seize those and that our bids are successful. And unfortunately, our previous bid for this this funding in the previous round wasn't successful. So yeah, the pressure is on. Something I am pleased about is you see there's a focus in the report on tenant involvement. We've already got one of our tenant ambassadors on the programme board. Officers have shared a tenant involvement strategy with me, which I think is really strong. And I'm really pleased about that for two reasons, really. One, I think it will give us a stronger bid and hopefully government will look more favourably upon our bid because of that emphasis on tenant involvement and the care we've taken to get that right. But also what's really vital is that if we are successful with this funding, it's really important that what we've bid for is something that tenants will work with us on, and that will want it done to their homes, will want the council, will want ODS coming into their property to do the work, because that is something we have found difficult on similar schemes as well. So on that note, I'll hand over. Mish, do you want to go into a bit more about what the bid involves?
Absolutely. So as members will probably be aware, we have earmarked £8.7 million within the HRA towards retrofit, covering the 4 years of the current MTFP. We're proposing to use a good chunk of that towards the works that Linda's sort of outlined. In sort of bold terms, looking at the cost, the likely cost of the works that need to be done, and the contribution that government is making available under the terms of its scheme, it means that we'll be able to do somewhere between 250 to 300 properties at a total cost of £9 million, of which the council would be picking up approximately £6 million. So it's about 2/3 HRA to 1/3 government is the way that the funding will work out on this. We look to do everything we can to drive down the cost per unit in terms of the retrofit. The that way we can make the money go further and get more homes done. And by doing that, we're looking at grouping different types of properties and going for groups of properties of a particular type, and also looking at localizing geographies, so sort of focusing on units in a particular locale. So I mean, in that way, we hope to be able to let the contract, which would be if we get success in our funding bid, which goes in on the 18th of November and will be determined by government, we're told, by February, or in February at least, then we would be straight into that and be commencing work across the city. I think the only other sort of point just to make out of the paper is that we're well aware that ODS has got some capabilities around retrofit, and we would seek to utilise or provide ODS an opportunity for work within this as well.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm seeing questions from Councillor Belly-Summers and Councillor Pegg. If anybody else has questions on the topic, please raise your hands now. I will take Councillor Belly-Summers first, please.
Oh, hi. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Linda, and the officers for this report. Page 25, it says that the retrofit is just going to be for houses, not flats. And the other one is about the significant external funding. So the reports state that they will need significant external funding. And I wonder what's going to happen if it's not happening. Are we going to see some kind of disastrous consequences, like with the Floyd's rule in the budget, for example? We heard that in the budget, because there was not much funding, then the council was considering cutting services for homelessness. So I know it's a kind of deviating from that, but I wondered if there will be some disastrous consequences if the external funding is not there, the significant external funding is not there for the retrofitting of these houses, just the houses, but not the flats. Thank you very much.
I think that the reason that we're focusing on houses is twofold. One is that it means that we don't have complexity of leasehold properties, which in pretty much all of our blocks of flats, there are some leasehold properties which it significantly complicates the sort of being able to apply sort of a type approach across a block. By ensuring that by doing houses, we know that they're all tenanted. We can sort of focus the work directly on city council tenants in that way. You rightly highlight the fact that this is, I mean, this takes a small proportion of those homes that are not EPCC rated, or i.e. below that level. So we've got some 2,500 properties that are at that level. So if we do say 300, that obviously clearly leaves many more to do. And realistically, we will need significantly more government funding over the next few years if that is to be done. We're going for, as you know, Linda was sort of clear, we have the funding opportunity now. We're going for it, and we're going for it, you know, at a size that we think is manageable, such that we can take learnings and it's budgeted for. Hopefully, this puts us in a stronger place with the learnings that we achieve from this to then, and you know, that we have a successful program, and puts us in a stronger place for a larger bid next time the funding comes through. But without government funding, I think it is fair to say that you know that we wouldn't be able to complete you know, retrofit of all the council properties. We don't have funds allocated to that level within the HRA to do that. And
just to chase you on the specific question, in the event that this bid isn't successful, is the intention to not do anything for the time being, to do a lesser number of houses within the same budget, or something different?
I mean, that's something which I think to be discussed with sort of cabinet members. We haven't had. We're at the moment we've put our eggs in the basket of a successful bid. If we're not successful, I think we will have done a good amount of work to appraise what exactly needs doing. So nothing will have been wasted in that respect. I think the question now as to whether or not we decide to crack on and use solely the HRA funds to proceed, or whether or not we hold back and wait for a further round, I think is a matter that would warrant discussion with portfolio holders.
Thank you. Councillor Pegg, please. I'm afraid you're once again inaudible. Maybe do the same thing you did last time, which sounds like you're using like Internet Explorer 7 or something. Still no good, I'm afraid.
Shall I go first?
Yeah. I think you'll have to. Lucy, please keep trying, and in the event that we hear you say, why isn't this thing working, in the midst of Susanna's question, we'll let you know. Please go ahead, Councillor Bressel.
Thank you. Yes, I'm trying to understand the financing, but I think I might have understood it now. It's not really matched funding because we contribute 2/3 of the funding and the government only 1/3, which seems terribly mean. And I'm also very worried that, 300 homes is brilliant and it will lower their heating costs fantastically. So it would be so good if we could go ahead, but £6 million is a lot of our money. And 300 homes is hardly anything compared with well over 2,000 that need to be done. So I was quite depressed by the figures. I don't know if you have any comment, Nish.
Only that I'm afraid that reflects the reality. That's I think over time we would hope that the economics of doing retrofit will improve. There are some reasons to think that it might, as supply chains gear up, as there's more activity in this space, and indeed as ODS itself sort of gains experience and capacity. But overall, the cost of work is significant. This is an opportunity, as the government has set out in that's what it's offering. We're taking or we're seeking to take what's on the table. It is, as you say, not match funding in the traditional sense of like for like. It is a contribution from government.
So I just said I think it's down to all of us to lobby politicians of all colours so that they're aware of the difficulties. Organisations like our council have making progress on this work, and the difficulty we will have without substantial future government funding, and we need to keep making the case for more central investment in this area.
Yeah. And we're in the middle of COP27.
So just to be clear, because it looks in the text of the document, at one point it talks about what seems like one-to-one match funding. I think it might use 50% match funding as the way of phrasing that. But is it actually the case that the terms are 2-to-1 match funding? And therefore we are, we're getting the optimal ratio within the terms of the deal?
No. The terms simply set a ceiling on the available funding per property. When we've appraised and we have done, Neris and Neris's team procured Bailey Garner to undertake a review of all of our housing stock to assess what type of work would need to be done for each different property type. When we've looked at, we've gone essentially for some of the lower hanging fruit here. The houses that are arguably simpler to retrofit than some of our other properties. But even then, when you actually assess the overall cost of works per property, given the ceiling that the government is placing on what they will contribute for each one, it is hence working out at about £2 council for every £1 government that it'll take to do this.
Oh, I see. Because there is text in there about the terms of the funding actually requiring that some sort of matching takes place, right? But
yeah, well, there's certainly yes, that's correct. So at a minimum, we would have to pay 50-50. But actually, we're going to be paying more like 66-33.
But then the fact that there's this ceiling combined with the cost of doing this to one dwelling means that you end up at the 2-to-1 ratio.
Precisely.
Cool. That all makes sense now. Thank you. Councillor Pegg, can I take your question, please? Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot that there's a technical reason for that. Any luck? Oh no, I'm afraid the.
Hear me again?
Yes. I don't know what it is you do every sort of 5th time or so, but whatever it is, it works. Keep doing it. Okay, please get your question in and don't touch the mute button again until the end of the meeting.
So I just wanted to ask a bit more about the thinking around not focusing the retrofitting on households that are most in need of making savings on their energy bills, and the decision to sort of focus it in a different way. I know that this was something that Child Poverty Review Group talked about last year, and I can't remember if it was one of our recommendations, but we definitely discussed that it would be really good to be using measures that are tackling the climate crisis, but also using them to tackle poverty in Oxford. And so I just wondered why you had decided not to do that approach and you'd gone with an alternative option.
I think it is, Councillor Pegg, really about trying to maximise the number of households that we can retrofit with the available funds. So there is no requirement under the terms of the Social Housing Decarb Fund scheme that we need to take household income into account. So the cheapest way, hence, of doing this is literally to find a group of properties that are all adjacent to each other and are all of the same type, that all need the same specific types of works done for each of those households. That just makes it cheaper to do, and if we take that approach, we can maximise the number of properties. If we were to go out and try and recruit tenants based on an assessment of means and need, well, firstly, that would considerably delay the process, and it would actually have complicated the basis for our bid. I note that with the LAD 1B scheme, where we did try to sort of take this type of approach, as Linda was saying just earlier, we did have some significant difficulties in recruiting people, even though we were sort of offering to do this work. So I think this is a different approach. It is actually set within the terms of the scheme that we most logically take this approach, and hopefully by doing the greatest number of properties, we will still nonetheless have a material impact on households that are in need, given the backdrop of the cost of living crisis and the sharp rise in energy bills. I suspect that a large number of our tenants are in need in respect of this sort of assistance.
Can I add something, Chris? It's just to say, as I said, I mean, we've got a target of 95% of homes being EPC C or above by 2030. We've got a target of homes being net zero by 2040. And so, everything we're doing in this area is really coming from a place of, getting us to meeting those as close to those targets as we can get with the limited resources available. So that's where we've come from on this.
Thank you. Councillor Pressley, your question, please.
Yes, have we retrofitted any homes already, or just one or two as kind of demonstration projects?
No, we've done a number. I don't know, Neris, if you wanted to talk to this one, but we have done a number already.
Yeah, so there's sort of two different ways of looking at it. So we've done a number of homes through a program called LAD 1B, which was a sort of a separate government funded program, and we have done a number through that, and I think Mish has described we've learned an awful lot through that process. A lot of that learning being taken then into this the kind of development of this bid. And of course, we do also do a smaller number, much smaller number of our own retrofitting work, where we have at times sort of tested kind of certain different kind of technologies to see how they've performed within our kind of stock. But we are talking a handful of kind of properties in that realm as things stand at the moment. But of course, that is all going to start to have to feature in a bigger and longer term programme of work for us going forward.
Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. And I had one question to ask, which is the reasoning from government for the rejection of our previous bid appears odd. It seems as if our previous bid was very sensible in trying to go first for the minimum disruption cases where you can work on void units. I just wondered, do we have sort of sufficient of an in with the department to have been able to have a dialogue there about what's gone on, or are we rather stuck sort of reading their words and confused about why they would think this way?
No, we did have the discussion. We got feedback, so they actually said that they thought it was a strong bid, and it made sense. Other than the fact that it went against one of the requirements that they had put in there, which was around tenant liaison, and since there were no tenants because we were looking purely at voids with the previous Social Housing Decarb Fund 1 bid, that it failed on that test. So it failed on a technicality, we were told. And incredible though that may seem, that stood and there was no basis for appealing it.
I see. So we were hoping that the argument for we have engaged with all of the zero tenants would fly as a piece of logic, which obviously I think it should, but we were bounced. Okay, fine.
I think there's a wider point for us to take away though there, and that is about the importance of tenant involvement, on anything to do with the HRA. Whenever we're spending HRA money, which is, money people, have paid, in rent, that they expect to be ploughed back into the improvement of their homes in the widest sense. And I think there's an important point for us to take away there, and make sure that we do incorporate that and do our best on tenant involvement. Whenever we're talking about large amounts of spending large amounts of HRA money, even if we can't identify particular tenants who will be affected, there is a wider principle there that we need to take account of.
Thanks,
and I will do my best to make sure we achieve that.
Thank you both. I don't see any more hands raised at the moment. Does anybody else wish to come in? Otherwise, I'd suggest that we should now move on to making recommendations. So Nish, Neris, Linda, stick around if you wish to hear and take part in that, or leave if you prefer to do so. Thank you all very much for your time and for your contributions this evening.
Thanks.
Okay, could I see hands from anybody that's wishing to venture a recommendation on this one?
Okay, sorry. Hi. Should we? Sorry, thank you very much. Should we take this as a consideration that although it is not always it's not always to take into account the needs of the tenants who have the most needs, it would be very important I don't know how to mention that. It is very important that the needs of the tenants are being considered with the retrofitting, because obviously it seems that it's not really much considered with this report, and taking into account what Linda was saying, that we take that a bit more into account. that is not necessarily the people who have the bigger houses. I mean, it has to be the tenants who have some kind of needs because they pay their rents and it's captures with the HRA, and it's the HRA we actually plow back into the retrofitting. So there is a consideration that everybody should be considered in their own merits with that. I don't know how to mention if it can be a recommendation in that way. Whatever Linda think might be more kind of appropriate.
Are you getting at Councillor Pegg's point about the relative merits of trying to sort by people who have the greatest need for having their energy bills reduced versus trying to optimize the program to get as many houses done as possible? Obviously, both of which have some merit, but yes, I see. Okay. I mean, so obviously they have considered and they've taken the choice that they have. It would seem reasonable to ask for just exposition on how and why that decision was taken, and whether in future waves of the same program would we again look to consider sorting by need rather than optimizing for total number of dwellings. I think it would at the very least be an interesting thing to see set out. To see that reasoning set out. So if the committee is happy, I would be happy to see that sent to cabinet. Does anybody wish to come in on the question? I don't hear any dispute. So let's put that to the cabinet. I'll be happy to read the response. Does anybody else wish to venture a recommendation? I'm not seeing any, so in that case we have one recommendation on the report, which seems appropriate to the relative scale of the items we've had before us today. And in that case, we should come back to our first. Oh no, we've just lost Councillor Pressel to an iPad battery, and we need now to revisit the question of recommendations on the SPD. So this might go interestingly. Could I see hands, please, from anybody that would like to venture a recommendation on the SPD? I see a hand from Councillor Pegg. How's the unmuting going to go? Give it a go. Yes, it has worked. Yes, excellent. Okay, what recommendations would you like to bring relating to the SPD?
So the first one was a recommendation for there to be some sort of clearer wording about how the SPD fits into the new local plan and that process of creating the new local plan, just because I think it's unclear, and I imagine others might have the questions I had. And then the second recommendation was around asking Cabinet whether they think it would be appropriate to consult again in some form, given that 40% of people who responded to the consultation said that they didn't think the consultation considered the key issues around the site.
Sorry, would you mind saying the second one again? My connection broke up for the critical bit of it.
Yeah, just around asking Cabinet whether they think it would be appropriate to consult again in some form, given that 40% of people who responded to the consultation said that it hadn't considered the key issues.
Okay, great, thank you. I think those are both recommendations that would be good to hear responses on. Does anybody wish to object? Doesn't look like it. Brilliant. Okay, in which case, thank you for both of those. I'll look forward to hearing their responses. Does anybody else want to venture a recommendation? I'm not seeing any others. Now, we have the issue that Susanna almost certainly would have several. I also note that legally speaking, this is an entirely informal meeting anyway, that because of the fact that we've been forced to conduct the meeting entirely on Zoom, then this is an informal meeting of the Scrutiny Committee, and Cabinet are gamely playing along rather than complying with official process in treating it in the same way as an official scrutiny meeting. that leads me to suggest that we might be able to asynchronously get any points from Susanna that she would wish to go forwards, and asynchronously circulate those to the committee and basically just solicit objections. I imagine what we're going to see here, given the tenor of the questions earlier, is requests for clarification on sort of specific technical matters that apply to the ward. I wouldn't expect them to be matters of controversy. I will do my very best to assess if there are any controversial questions going forwards there. But are people basically happy with that proposal for some sort of asynchronous dialogue on the matter? I see nods from those with their cameras on. A double thumbs up even. Thank you, Chris. So in that case, let's proceed forwards in that way. Richard, sorry.
Sorry, just to say, I shall email Councillor Pressel this evening to ask her to email, if at all possible, this evening, and then we'll circulate them to the committee in the morning. So if I could ask you just to check your phones over your morning coffee, that'd be great.
Yes, yes. What is your deadline for the purposes of getting things to the cabinet?
So I will be working on the recommendations tomorrow for your sign off as chairman Wednesday. So
yes, I see. Okay, so this had to be a very quick matter. The good thing is, of course, in the event that Councillor Pressel does suggest any highly controversial recommendations, then they are only recommendations, and there's not a lot of harm can be done. And it's always good to see more rather than less answers out of the cabinet. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. That's all very useful. In that case, that brings us to the last, well, not the last, but the last substantive item on the agenda, which is the Climate and Environment Panel. So obviously earlier in the year, we resolved that a Climate and Environment Panel should be established, membership 4 people. And I believe this evening, the business is to select a chair and membership. Richard, could I hand over you to set out the specifics, as I'm sure I've forgotten a crucial detail there.
Yes, it's essentially that. The remit and proposed business has been on houses, as you can imagine, and has seen lots of consultation and involvement to get something that is considered useful to the scrutiny function. It's now over to you.
All right. In that case, I suppose I need to ask for proposals for the chair of the new panel. And it appears that nobody wishes to propose a chair for the new panel. This could be a problem.
Sorry, Chair. Can I say something? Sorry,
yes,
Chair,
please.
to interrupt. Paula Dune was manifested an interest in Labour Group. So I don't know, she's not here and she's not part of the Scrutiny Committee, so I don't know how it would work.
Okay. I have a hand from Councillor Hunt. Councillor Hunt?
Yeah, sorry, I sort of lost track of what was going on. Yes, no, I put myself forward to be chair along with, yeah, I mean, Paula and I both had, so, but I'm happy to be chair.
Okay, you're proposing yourself to be chair. Councillor Belly-Summers, for clarity, were you wishing to propose Councillor Dunn to be chair or not?
No, that's fine. No.
Okay, right. In that case, so various people don't have their cameras on, so I suppose I'll have to either ask you to turn your cameras on or to use the Zoom hand to indicate how you wish to vote on the matter. So the proposal is for Jemima Hunt to be the chair of the new panel. Does anybody wish to second? I see a wave from Councillor Mundy. Thank you. Okay, all those in favour that Councillor Hunt should be the chair of the new panel.
Yeah. Good.
Okay, I see at least a majority of those present. Thank you very much. In which case, Councillor Hunt shall be the chair of the new panel. The membership then shall be 2 members of the Labour group, 1 member of the Liberal Democrats, and 1 member of the Green group. I can say for my part that the Liberal Democrats wish to nominate Councillor Miles to be our person on that panel. Would either of the 2 Greens like to state their preference?
As Councillor Kerr.
Councillor Kerr from the Green group, and does anybody from the Labour group want to specify the group's preference for the remaining Labour seat?
Oh.
Say again, sir?
I'm happy to be part of it. Yeah.
I think it was Nadine and Paula put themselves forward. Is that correct? Or is it just one besides myself?
There is only one place besides you.
Paula and myself, yeah.
Okay. Is it necessary for us to resolve the question tonight? Richard, can you comment on whether is it acceptable for the Labour group to decide which of Councillor Belly-Summers and Councillor Dunn wants to be the 4th member? Or do we need that to be?
Sorry, no, there is a no, that's okay, Chris. I didn't understand. I saw there were 3. So it's Jemima and Councillor Paula Dune. That's what was decided at the beginning. Yeah. Sorry for the confusion.
Okay, right. So in that case, the membership which we have before us is Councillor Kerr, Councillor Miles, and Councillor Dunn, and in the chair, Councillor Hunt. Is everybody satisfied with that?
Great, thank you.
I see nods. Excellent. Right, excellent. In which case, let's consider that done. Thank you all very much. And that means that the final item on our agenda is a report back on recommendations. I regrettably don't have them in front of me right this second. Richard, do you have them on, in front of you? Are you able to briefly recap? Otherwise, I'll have to just ask you to read the briefing notes.
Yeah, no, I shall scroll through. So you had given recommendations on the development brief for Botley Road, and they were both accepted at the meeting, so certainly accepted. More formally, and recommendations to the UK Shared Prosperity Fund investment plan. Comments were received in response, with Councillor Thomas explaining that she had wanted to give words rather than ticks in order to explain Cabinet's position. And the housing homelessness and treatment strategy was largely around making things clearer and tidying things up, and Cabinet was happy to accept them.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. All right. In that case, we have a date of the next meeting, and then I think we're done. I will dig that up. Scrutiny will next meet on ... as he hurriedly clicks the thing, the 5th of December. Scrutiny will next main scrutiny will next meet on the 5th of December. Wonderful. All right. And that is the end of that. Thank you all very much indeed for attending. Sorry that the arrangements for doing so were hastily altered. Hopefully all the technological gremlins will be sorted out for next time. Thank you all very much for coming. Have a very nice evening and goodbye.